So, after ranking every game by combat a couple weeks ago, I kept thinking about one specific aspect crucial to having diverse combat, this being weapons. One of the things that gives these games so much replay value is that there is usually a diverse choice of weapons. Some are amazing, some are average to decent, and some are absolute jokes, but I'm still glad they're there anyway. So today, it's not really a ranking as such, I'm just going to tell you which weapon is my favourite to use in each of these games. I won't be including Sekiro for obvious reasons, but all the others will get touched upon. Of course, let me know your favourite weapons in each of these games in the comments below, and smash up that subscribe button if you want to help support the channel. Let's kick this off with Demon Souls. Probably the game where I've had the least experience with the weapon variety. I imagine this is actually a fairly standard choice, but the meat cleaver is the weapon I enjoyed the most here. The heavy overhead R2 is just so satisfying. The normal R1 is also okay, but the R2 is where it's at for me. I don't normally like big heavy weapons with slow movesets, but this is definitely the exception. Despite looking like a sword and dealing slashing damage, this weapon is actually classed as a large hammer, one of only 3 weapons in the game with this type. Just love the brutality of it really. On top of that, it does magic damage as well as physical, and has S scaling in strength and dex, as well as A scaling in faith. That's insane. I don't think I've ever seen any weapon in any of these games with that much scaling. And if all of that still isn't enough, you restore 1% of your health with each successful hit. This thing's an absolute beast and I really like it. Borderline overpowered perhaps, but so much fun. So, on to Dark Souls 1, and I think it's a tie for this one. There's 2 weapons that I really love. One of them you can probably guess from my older videos is the Butcher Knife. Kinda similar to the Meat Cleaver in some ways, such as the appearance and the health regen from successful hits, but I think I like this more. Sure, it doesn't have the crazy scaling or the magic damage of the Meat Cleaver, but it makes up for this by having an axe moveset instead of a large hammer. This means it's actually pretty fast for a weapon of this size and range. It still has an A scaling for strength, which is pretty nice, so it tends to be my go-to weapon on a Dark Souls 1 run. My other choice is the weapon I used on my first ever Dark Souls 1 playthrough, also my first ever FromSoft game playthrough, Quelaag's Fury Sword. Aesthetically, I think this thing looks awesome with the red stream behind each swing. It's fast and you trade in the kick for a slice and backflip maneuver, similar to the Bloodhound Fang's Ash of War in Elden Ring. This sword deals some high fire damage and has a respectable B scaling in dex, as well as a damage increase depending on how much humanity you have on hand. This can mow through a lot of the bosses in the base game, but its one drawback is the DLC bosses who tend to resist fire, especially Calamite. It kind of becomes useless there. Still, a really cool weapon though, and it also kind of reminds me of the point where I really started enjoying Dark Souls 1. Onwards to Dark Souls 2. I think my weapon of choice here was the Bandit Axe. I like the speed and I really prefer weapons with a horizontal swipe as opposed to a vertical one, so this works perfectly for me. It has a respectable B scaling in strength at plus 10, but can still have decent scaling in other areas when infused thanks to the way that infusing works in Dark Souls 2. This weapon carried me through most of my first playthrough of Scholar of the First Sin. I also love the backstab animation for this. It looks like you're jamming the axe right into the top of their skull. The only downside, and maybe this is more a Dark Souls 2 thing, is the durability isn't the best. One of my earlier videos on this channel was me fighting Lud and Zalin, and the axe broke mid-fight, causing me to have to switch to another unupgraded bandit axe mid-fight to get the final hits in. I'm sure people will comment below with many other much better weapons than this one in Dark Souls 2, but for me, this is the one I seem to gravitate towards. Honourable mention to the Homunculus Mace, which helped me bring down Blue Smelter Demon in my no leveling run. Next up we have Bloodborne, and what a great selection of weapons there is here. I think it could be quite easy to stick with the Sword Cleaver throughout your whole playthrough, especially on a no leveling run as it's one of the few weapons you can actually use, but I'm going to have to go with the Whirligig Saw. This is one of the coolest ideas for a weapon I've seen in these games. Literally a spinning serrated saw that you can use to grind through anything in your path. The L2 attack in the transformed state keeps the saw spinning in front of you as long as you have the stamina for it, which is awesome for boss fights and can dish out a ton of damage. The normal R1 and R2 attacks are fine, but really this is what you've come here for, and usually it's what I go for every time. You can even use some poison gems as the repeated hits will cause this to proc pretty quickly. Honourable mention goes to the Kirk Hammer, the weapon I used most of my first playthrough. I love the versatility of switching between a quick sword and a heavy hammer. It gives you 2 different types of damage, thus increasing your options when facing different foes. On to Dark Souls 3, and guess what's back? The Butcher Knife. Well, it was also featured in Dark Souls 2, but they changed the moveset there to something much slower. Here, the Butcher Knife returns with a similar moveset to Dark Souls 1, and thus I love it, especially with Dark Souls 3's faster combat. But on top of this, the butcher knife has a couple other nice perks. Firstly, its strength scaling is now S when upgraded to max, further increasing its power. It also has a sort of useful weapon skill, Sharpen. This increases damage for 25 seconds, but also increases the amount of HP restored with each hit. This means you can activate this in a pinch if you're about to get a bunch of hits in to restore some health. Overall, chances are you haven't seen another YouTube video where someone's gushed all over the butcher knife this much, but yet this seems to be what I'm into for some reason. Maybe it's my love for horror movies that makes this kind of weapon so appealing, or perhaps a psychologist would say I'm a serial killer. Who knows? Well, on that note, seems like a perfect time to move on to our last entry, Elden Ring. So my favourite weapon here is Moonveil Katana. No, I'm joking, don't worry. I did actually use this on my first playthrough, but I'd avoided any guides or videos until I completed the game once through, so I had no idea about this weapon's reputation online until afterwards. I found this just from exploring the world, and yeah, I did find it made a lot of the game way too easy, until I got to Millennia where suddenly it became absolutely useless. My actual favourite weapon is what I used to beat Millennia for the first time, the Bloodhound Claws. I never even considered using claw weapons in any previous games, but once I found the hook claws in Stormveil Castle, I was hooked. Hey, I just became a dad 2 weeks ago, I'm allowed to make these kind of jokes. Anyway, I love the rapid speed of the attacks that these claws allow, slashing through enemies like Wolverine. The claws have built-in bleed as well, which means they're a great candidate for the classic bleed and frost build. I like that two-handing the claws means you have a claw in each hand, as opposed to that weird wrist-holding thing from some of the previous games. The one drawback really is the range compared to other weapons, but I kinda like getting up close and personal, whipping out some quick hits to proc a status effect. Bloodhound Step is pretty fun to combine with these for the full Bloodhound experience. I did think about having a somber weapon here with a unique Ash of War, but I just love the variety of being able to equip different ashes and switch between different element and status. Well, those are my favourites, but what about you? What are your favourite weapons in these games? Let me know in the comments below, and if you want to help support the channel, smash that subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of new videos. Just to fill you guys in on some of the upcoming videos, I'm going to do 2 more entries in the best and worst in every Souls game series. One will be focused on the best and worst mechanics in each Souls game, and one's going to be focused on the best and worst aspects or parts in each Souls game, which will be a more general, broad topic, but I think it'll be pretty fun. Hope you guys will enjoy. I'll also have a longer video which is like a fun run that I'm doing through Elden Ring, where I'm trying to beat all of the Elden Ring minor dungeons using only equipment found within. I don't expect this to be out before sometime next month, to be honest with you, just because of time commitments, but it should be a good video as well. In the meantime, why don't you check out some of the other videos on my channel if you haven't already. There's 2 on the screen here, one for top 5 gimmick boss fights, and one for best and worst areas in every Souls game. Until then, see you next time, have a good one, thanks for watching, and see you later.